am joined by Drew Lerner now. We're talking about the weather, and apparently you know a lot about the weather.
Make it look good, right?
Let's talk a little bit first about your background and your history with weather, I guess.
Well, I've been forecasting the weather internationally for like 35 years.
Wow.
And it all started with a college grant that led me to India to collect weather data for their monsoon season. So I became an international weather guy at that point, and the rest is more or less history. The company I worked for a long time, they were into public works forecasts originally, but they decided at some point that they wanted to go into agriculture.
Okay.
And so in the early 1980s, we were told that we wanted to become experts in agriculture, and that our job was to become that. And so over a number of years, we focused on that. And so that was the rest of, I've just been doing the same thing since then, and really learned to become an agricultural meteorologist.
Cool. Do you find people blame you for stuff a lot?
Oh, yeah. But
Comes with the territory?
Yeah, but you know what? I have to admit that I don't know anything. I mean, if they want to say I don't know what I'm doing, I don't know what I'm doing.
There you
I
go.
really don't, and that's the really truth. Why people would hire somebody to come and tell them what the weather's going to do 6 and 9 months from now when we can't do it right for tomorrow, is beyond me. But I'm glad it's a good job for me, right? So.
Excellent. So you are part of the inaugural CropSphere. What have you been chatting with people about? You had your session earlier. What was that all about?
Well, the main focus that we had at that time was on the longer range outlook. These producers here want to know whether or not they're going to be able to get their crops in, when is going to be the best time to plant. They wanted to know maybe what kind of crop to put in the ground. Some crops do well in drier environments, some do better in wetter environments.
Yep.
So, giving them a little bit of insight as to what we think the trend will be can help them make some decisions. And that's really what we do with our service for the farmers up there. We try to do that regularly.
Well, you've made it clear that you don't know anything, but what were you telling people? What is the outlook for the weather?
Well, the outlook, I think this spring is going to be fairly decent for planting. There is an abundance of moisture that's currently present in parts of Alberta in the west. That's a result of this record-setting snow that they had earlier in the growing season, or not growing season, the winter season.
Yes.
And that snow is going to have to melt off at some point. So we may end up with a lot of moisture there. If it turns out that we have a warm, drier bias in the second half of winter, early spring, then a lot of that moisture will not be available for crops. So we were talking about that a little bit as a possibility. Another thing we were talking to about something that's going to influence the weather this summer is a dry pattern that's going on in the U.S., the western part of the U.S. As if that persists through the rest of winter and they end up with a dry spring, the ground's really dry, it will help to reinforce a high pressure ridge when we go into the growing season. And that ridge could get really strong and go all the way up into Alberta. And if that happens, then we'll have a blocking weather pattern and we'll end up very dry and very hot. So that's not the official forecast, but we wanted to wave a caution flag about that. The official forecast gives us an environment that's still favorable for our crops, but with a little less rain than we have had in recent years, especially in the west. And for the eastern areas, we'll probably do well with timeliness and precipitation, but we're going to be a little cold in the spring, and so it may not be ideal, but it will probably be okay. But a lot of that's going to be keyed in on that drought in the U.S.
Okay, excellent. Wow, you are just a wealth of knowledge, Drew. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
We will be back with more information on CropSphere. Stay right here on Go Saskatoon.